The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, the #1 listener-supported internet radio. And please go over there and support them on Patreon. My name is Diamond, your host from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and this is my lovely co-host and partner, Leah Shaper. Welcome to the show. Oh, and your mic is working.
It is, but I'm echoing again, I hear.
I unbuttoned my top button because she said I look like a high school teacher.
I thought you should leave it. High school science teacher is perfect for this, and you need your pocket protector and your pen.
I'll put a pen in.
Just missing the pocket protector now.
Yep. All right. Welcome to the show. Today's show is going to be fantabulous. We are going to be talking about two topics that are intertwined that literally changed the face of the earth and not too long ago. This event literally changed world history. Migrations occurred, massive famine, new types of cholera, and many people didn't even know what was going on. We're going to be talking about the eruption of Mount Tambora in April of 1815, which was followed by
the year without a summer,
which was a bummer, and that would be in 1816. And the eruption of Mount Tambora, a lot of people think that that was the only thing going on, when in fact, starting in about 1808, a series of eruptions were taking place on Earth. But because we didn't have internet and cell phone, a lot of people didn't know what was going on until much later, much after the fact. In fact, a sequence of 4 VEI 4, 5, and 6s occurred. 4 eruptions, 1808, 1811, 1812, before Tambora tore the top off. Tambora is such an impressive eruption. It would be the largest eruption you can get on Earth before a super eruption.
Right. Oh, this wouldn't be considered a super eruption?
No, super volcanoes are VEI 8 only, the highest rating.
Right.
Yeah, so this is a VEI 7, but this is not insignificant. Tambora created a crater that's a half a mile deep and 7 miles wide. It looks like a circle in the regular top of a normal volcano, but this opening is 7 miles wide and a half a mile deep.
Yeah, huge.
And let's show everyone a picture of that that's going to be watching tonight. There it is. That is the hole created from the VEI 7 eruption, the final main eruption. This thing erupted for 3 years after the main blast. And we're going to get to all the details in just a second. The main blast was April 10th. And that was heard for at least 2,000 miles. And that's what created this hole we're looking at.
Yeah. And just to specify exactly where this is Indonesia. I am forgetting right now the name of the particular island. Do you know that?
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're going to get into that right now. And here's a picture of Mount Tambora. And I've got the location here. So Mount Tambora is a location, is a volcano on the island of Sumbawa, which is in present-day Indonesia, in the part of the Dutch East Indies. The 1815 eruption was the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history, with a VEI, or volcanic explosive index, of 7. The eruption ejected 37 to 45 cubic kilometers of rock equivalent. That's a lot. And that was into the atmosphere and the stratosphere. And recent studies have shown it was such a large explosion, it literally created an electrical effect on the global electric circuit. And the ionosphere electrified and literally pulled some of the material, get this, up into the ionosphere. So not only did it blast into the stratosphere, it filled the ionosphere with sulfates, particulates, and dust.
Amazing.
That's going to be a bad day, let alone couple years, for that stuff to get out of there.
Is that effect like specifically from the charge of the particles that were launched into the atmosphere?
Yeah, there's so much so much kind of ion. That's why there's these huge volcanic lightning storms on certain eruptions. You get so Hunga Tonga recorded the most volcanic lightning strikes ever on Earth during that eruption.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So this would have probably been much greater than that had we been here to record the lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And what the recent study shows is that, and it's from the Hunga Tonga event, that there's actually like a magnetic attractor effect up in the ionosphere. It pulls from the stratosphere material up even higher, which makes
That's
it
amazing.
Yeah, that's like the ultimate geoengineering right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and here we think that we as humans have some ability to accomplish massive geoengineering that's going to change the climate of the entire globe.
Yeah,
sorry, but I don't think we have that power capability right now.
No, but if we shoot 45 cubic kilometers, or let's say 11 cubic miles of material up into the stratosphere, and it gets pulled into the ionosphere, a couple things happen. The first thing that happened, a few days later, it started raining. Mm-hmm. And it rained for weeks. So it's kind of like an actual account of how you could get a biblical flood.
Sure.
A large VEI 7 eruption could literally cause it in some areas to rain for months. Mm-hmm. So although the Mount Tambora eruption reached a violent climax on the 10th of April in 1815, increasing steaming and small phreatic eruptions occurred during the next 6 months to 3 years. So it took a while to calm down. Mm-hmm. The ash from the eruption column dispersed around the world and lowered global temperatures in an event, which we'll get to in the second half, known as the Year Without a Summer in 1816. Now, this brief period of significant climate change triggered extreme weather and harvest failures in many areas around the world, and several climate forcings coincided and interacted in a systematic manner that has not been observed after any other large volcanic eruption since the Stone Age. Now, did you catch what they said in there? This is what I found interesting. Where is it? Several climatic forcings coincided. Yeah. What do you think they're talking about?
I mean, it's... I can't not laugh because it's like, okay, we talk about solar forcing, right? We're talking about forces that are incredibly large. And it would seem that they're trying to suggest that like anthropogenic global warming would also be some sort of climate forcing. I feel like that's tucked in there somewhere.
Well, they don't start that until 1850 for good measure, because that's when really the temperature records start. And this is before that. Yeah. And they're referring to, in a haphazard way, a grand solar minimum, the Dalton minimum.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the only really accepted cool period in recent history. A lot of people don't accept the centennial minimum in the 1900s as being a true minimum, but you can see here on the sunspot count, the Dalton minimum was a significant reduction in sunspots for at least 2 decades. Some add this cycle, and it would be a 3-decade minimum, grand minimum.
Yeah.
And the volcanic eruptions, look, so the Dalton minimum begins just before 1800 in like 1798.
Yeah.
And the first series of large volcanic eruptions occur here at the solar minimum of the second cycle in the minimum.
Yeah.
And they begin in 1808. They peak here at the bottom in 1812. And then on the rise here in 1815 is Tambora. So all these eruptions happen down here at the very bottom of the Dalton minimum.
Yeah, and also I learned yesterday that Tambora actually started rumbling a bit around 1812. Like yes, it had been very quiet for a long time, and it started to make some noise. 1812, it doesn't erupt until 1815.
Yeah, so let's talk about the chronology of the eruption. So Mount Tambora had experienced several centuries of dormancy before 1815, and it was caused by the gradual cooling of the magma. And then in 1812, the volcano began to rumble, and it generated a dark cloud. On the 5th of April in 1815, which is 5 days before the big boom, a giant eruption occurred, followed by thunderous detonation sounds heard by Makassar on Sulawesi, 240 miles away, Batavia, which is now Jakarta, 780 miles away, and Ternate on the Molucca Islands, 870 miles away. And this is interesting because the Napoleonic Wars are going on at this time, and there's also ships all over the ocean and in this region, and there was a naval captain. He thought that there was a war going on.
Yeah, he thought it was like cannon fire.
So they
All
rushed.
of a sudden.
They rushed to the volcano.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Now, on the morning of the 6th of April, volcanic ash began to fall in East Java, with faint detonation sounds lasting until the 10th of April. So these booms are going on for 4 days and ash is falling. This was first thought to be the sounds of firing guns that was heard on the 10th of April in Sumatra, more than 1,600 miles away.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And then at about 1900 UTC, on the 10th of April, the eruptions intensified. 3 plumes rose up and merged together. The whole mountain was turned into a flowing mass of liquid fire. That sounds
fun.
Yeah. Pumice stones of up to 8 inches or 20 centimeters in diameter started raining down from the sky, followed by ash about an hour or 2 later. Pyroclastic flows cascaded down the mountain to the sea on all sides of the peninsula, essentially wiping out all human life in the village of Tambora. Loud explosions were heard until the next evening, all the way to the 11th of April, and the ash veil spread as far as West Java and South Sulawesi. A nitrous odor was noticeable in Batavia, and a heavy tephra-tinged rain fell between the 11th and 17th of April. So this is rock rain for 6 days.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard a statistic yesterday too that the amount of ash, like just even the initial ash, could have covered the UK knee deep, the entire UK.
Yeah, here's the ash field, and this is hundreds of miles wide.
Yeah.
And within the small region of, let's say, 50 square miles, there was 1 meter of ash.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about the size of the, make it a little bigger for UK, and you're knee deep there. Pretty insane eruption. And everything's buried. So it's not like you're going to have death, smell. Everything's already buried there. All the bodies are buried.
Yeah. Yeah. Your initial death toll is like 10,000 people, but that's just right at the outset.
Oh my, so people who think that 10,000 dead from Tambora, that's just the people nearby.
Yeah.
This eruption killed millions and millions, and you'll understand that at the end of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So, pretty significant, and we did show you the ash flow map here. You can see that as far as Borneo, there was 5 to 20 centimeters on the coast. Sulawesi had a similar amount. Bali was under 25 centimeters of ash, and quite a significant eruption there. The 1815 eruption, in fact, was the largest observed eruption in recorded history. Pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So the aftermath. All vegetation on the island was destroyed. Uprooted trees mixed with pumice ash washed into the sea and formed rafts up to 5 kilometers across. And between the 1st and 3rd of October, the British ship Farley and James Sebald encountered extensive pumice rafts about 3,600 kilometers west of Tambora. That's far away.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to remember, pumice, which floats on water, rained out of the sky for 6 days.
Yeah. You want a helmet for that at the very least.
I was going to say that. You took my line.
Oh, poor baby.
Now, clouds of thick ash still covered the summit on the 23rd of April, and all explosions ceased on the 15th of July. So that's like April, May, June, 3 months later. I
mean, just it must have been hell on earth to be nearby, and you're wondering, when is this thing going to stop exploding? If you made it.
If you made it.
Yeah.
Flames and rumbling aftershocks were reported in August of 1819. So that's 4 years later, and people are still getting freaked out.
Wow. Wow.
They do claim a moderate-sized tsunami struck the shores of various islands, but the initial eruption and pyroclastic flows are what killed most everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a little 10-foot tsunami is just going to rinse off your flesh after it was burned off.
Oh, that's just a lovely image. Thank you for that.
Sorry. According to studies, the eruption column reached the stratosphere, and the new studies, like I said, that material was pulled up into the ionosphere. Longitudinal winds spread fine particles all the way around the entire globe, creating optical phenomenon. Prolonged and brilliantly colored sunsets and twilights were seen frequently in London between the 28th of June and the 2nd of July of 1815.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you a really good time frame on how long it takes when an Indonesian volcano erupts for ash to get all the way up into Europe. And
Yes.
so, yeah, May, June, July. It's like 3 months it takes to get up to Europe and affect the sunsets.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty interesting. The glow of the twilight sky typically appeared orange or red near the horizon and purple or pink above. It sounds similar to wildfires.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they go on to say that the estimated number of deaths varies upon the source. Also, what's highly variable is the temperature fluctuations.
Yeah.
Some people say as little as 0.4 to 0.7 degrees, and some other sources say 4 to 7 degrees.
Yeah. I've seen 3 and 4 degrees cited a lot, but at the same time, you know, note that we'll get into this, I'm sure, but note that there's crazy extreme weather events like snow in Philadelphia in like June.
Yeah, in New England, all the rivers north of Pennsylvania froze in the summer, and they were used for moving goods. They didn't really have highways or anything. And so all commerce stopped in New England. It literally brought the United States to a halt.
Yeah.
But what didn't stop was shipping. And the United States saved millions of lives in Europe because all the crops failed there, and it was the imported goods from the New World that saved the lives of many.
Yeah. And even then, it must have been extraordinarily difficult because, like you just said, we obviously had some local shipping difficulties in the Northeast.
Yes.
As it was.
And it took months to get up there. So when the ash and the twilights are changing, it's in the beginning of July. That's right when the crops are in the ground.
Yeah.
So then if something's coming after that, and in fact, what came was very extreme. You can see here over in Russia, the temperature is actually warmer during this event. Yeah. But look what happened to France. This is where all the food is here in France and Germany and northern Spain. The temperature dropped as much as 3.5 to 4 degrees C.
Yeah.
And that was the issue. And this is where all the people are at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then again, even still, like we said this already, a lot of food was imported from America, but even like, Thomas Jefferson in Monticello, New York, lost like all of his crops.
Yeah.
It was just too cold.
He had to take a loan, and he was financially desperate at that moment in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So they estimate the number of deaths at 10,000 caused by the pyroclastic flows. But on Sumbawa, 18,000 starved to death and died of disease. And about 10,000 people on Lombok died from disease and hunger shortly thereafter. So Petrochesky in 49 estimated that 48,000 people were killed on Sumbawa and 44,000 on Lombok as a direct result of the eruption. So that's 88,000 local deaths. Now that is just a drop in the bucket because millions are about to die from cholera and typhus over in Europe and India. And that is going to be what starts to shift the entire history of the world. So let's talk about what they say about the disruption of global temperatures before we get into more details on the year without a summer, which is about to happen. The eruption caused a volcanic winter, and that's what a lot of people call it, during the Northern Hemisphere in the summer of 1816. So this is a whole year after the eruption.
Yeah.
Even more. It's, if it was the year, so it's, Yeah, it's like a year and several months. 15 months
Well,
later.
and the critical piece of this that we didn't exactly mention, it has to do with the size of the eruption and the fact that it does reach the stratosphere, and so therefore the effects become global. Like, had it not been such a large eruption and it had not reached the stratosphere, it would not have been nearly as severe or delayed.
And right. And the reason it's delayed, even though it's a big eruption, is because it takes months. It took 3 months for the first dust to make it to Europe after the eruption. And it literally took a whole year for it to mix enough in the northern hemisphere to blot out the sun and start to lower the temperature in the whole hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what's going on here. But again, if you were listening from the beginning, Tambora was the nail in the coffin. There were 4 large eruptions that had already started pumping this material up there.
Mm-hmm.
So we said that it had a volcanic explosive index of 7. They say the eruption column went up 45 kilometers. That's 148,000 feet. Hunga Tunga went higher. Yeah, it went almost to space.
Interesting.
But the difference is that's more like a bullet shooting out of a barrel, whereas Tambora and the amount of material that came out is more like a shotgun.
Right.
So tiny hole for Hunga Tunga and a gigantic hole and huge amounts of material for Tambora.
Sure.
Yeah. So Hunga Tunga is not going to cool the Earth 4 degrees, but it is probably doing a good job.
Probably helping a bit.
Yeah, because the 4 other eruptions prior to Tambora started to cool the Earth, and that is, it's known. There's a large volcanic event, 2013 or in 1813, that's an unidentified volcano, which is coming in at VEI 6.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Here is the chart. So this is the volcanic sulfate concentration in the atmosphere, and it's 1810, an unknown. So this is Tambora here.
Yeah.
This is pretty significant as far as sulfate. Look at that.
Yeah. It's almost as significant as Tambora itself.
Right. And these are the VEI 4s down here. Very
This is coming from like the GISP or something?
The Central Greenland Ice Core.
Okay.
And so there is another large eruption coming from this region at the same time.
Wow.
So it's like priming the year without a summer. You get a VEI 6, several VEI 4s, and then a VEI 7 is the coffin, is the nail in the coffin.
It would be interesting to take another look at the historical records to see what people noticed around that time. Like I would sort of suspect that perhaps the Tambora eruption in a historical context has just overshadowed this previous eruption. But it would be interesting to see what the references are and what observations were made.
Yes, I agree. I do agree. So before the year without a summer, the year after the eruption, or the spring and summer of 1815, we'll call it, there was a persistent dry fog observed in the northeast U.S. The fog reddened and dimmed the sunlight, just like in Europe. A few months later, they saw the sunlight, the twilight sunsets.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? You could see sunspots on the sun during the day.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how hazy it was.
Wow.
And if you didn't know, this was such a significant event that in the year 1816, the year without a summer, we got Frankenstein, and we've got all the vampire stories all begin. And before we go to break, it all happens off Lake Geneva when they were all living in this house. They went up for the summer in 1816, Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and others, and they had a writing competition. And because it was so gloomy and weird and bizarre, they came up with all these weird stories. We'll get to that in the second half, but I want to read the first part of Lord Byron's poem Darkness, because he's up in Lake Geneva, and this is the tone of the day. I had a dream, which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space, rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and came and brought no day, and men forgot their passions in the dread of this their desolation, and all hearts were chilled into selfish prayer for light.
Mm. Yeah, that's pretty apropos.
It doesn't sound like a fun time.
No.
No. And we'll be back to tell you how unfun the year without a summer actually was. Stay tuned for more Boom.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There was blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance. People under fire. Children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with the second half of our show on the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 and the year without a summer, which was a bummer, to say the least. So we've got this VEI-7 eruption happens in April. Things a few months later in the northern hemisphere, the sunsets are getting a little weird. There's a dry fog in New England, and they're wondering what's going on. Do you think that there was like media around where people connected it back then?
I don't. I mean, it would have taken several months, right, to get word of this volcanic eruption to the United States. So maybe by that time, maybe people knew what was going on. I don't know if they made the connection though.
Yeah, they had a year later. It's going to snow in the summer, and the rivers are going to freeze.
Right, but then you also need to have the knowledge about how a volcano can affect your weather on the other side of the globe. And that may not have been in available information. Yeah,
so we're already at a cold point in Earth here. We're in the Dalton minimum. It's cool. And then 5 eruptions occur within 5 years. A VEI-6, 3 VEI-4s, and then a VEI-7. I mean, when is that going to happen again? If it's going to happen anytime, it's in the next decade or so.
Yeah, it's going to be in our grand solar minimum that we're basically already in.
Yep. And in one of the minimums, and now we're in a maximum, so we have to wait a little to the next cycle.
But I was thinking, Hunga Tonga may have been the initial eruption. If there were a chain of eruptions, sort of like what we see here in this era, Hunga Tonga would probably be number 1.
And now Iceland's been acting up, and we're waiting for an eruption from Katla, which erupts VEI-4 or better. So that will be a big boom, shut down air traffic.
Is that a sheath volcano?
It's a large explosive volcano.
Okay.
Yeah. Not like the Reykjanes Ridge that's a fissure eruption that's kind of VEI-0.
Right.
Katla is very explosive and dangerous and just explodes. It goes boom.
Yeah.
Similar to Tambora, but not VEI-7. It's only VEI-4 and 5 how it explodes. Mm-hmm. So the sunspot number is low. It takes about a year for it to begin cooling in the northern hemisphere. And then boom, we have the year without a summer. 1816 is not only known as the year without a summer, it has other names like poverty year or 1800 and frozen to death. So early European settlers were drawn to the temperate climate of the eastern U.S. and we were just starting to, farm and populate. And this event, the year without a summer, caused the largest mass migration in United States history. It began the westward migration. And the states of Indiana and Illinois only exist because of the year without a summer. Everyone went from Vermont and New England regions and went to where is now Indiana and Illinois to farm.
And just generally the Great Lakes regions, which is interesting because that's not typically the warmest place, but apparently it was warmer there than the East Coast.
Yeah, and you get lake effect. So you've got this giant thermal mass. If you're near the lake, it's warm.
Right.
That also brings lake effect snow. So hopefully they lived on the right side of it.
Right. I know, I was thinking about this yesterday because I didn't realize this Great Lake migration occurred. And having many years ago done my mother's genealogy, I did notice that movement, and I'm assuming that the time frame matches up. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, but I bet you most people left if they could.
Yeah.
Okay, May frosts in the year without a summer killed most of the crops in New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So there's no reason to stay.
Yeah.
Especially if you can't put another crop in because it's still freezing. And this all happened in June when heavy snow smothered the ground in Albany, New York, all the way up to Dennisville, Maine. So there must have been a June nor'easter.
Yeah.
Frost persisted for 5 consecutive nights on the coast of Cape May.
Yeah.
That's insane. It almost never freezes in the winter.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Relentless cold weather extended all the way late into summer and would have normally been the harvest season. In July, lakes and rivers remained frozen as far south as northwestern Pennsylvania from the previous winter. That's crazy.
And I mentioned this earlier, but apparently there were some snowstorms in June in Philadelphia and New York too, I think.
Yeah, well, probably part of that nor'easter there.
Yeah.
Frost remained in Virginia until late August.
Yeah.
Wow. Temperatures dipped from above normal summer temperatures to near freezing within hours, all because of volcanic eruption on the other side of the world.
That's interesting in and of itself that there was that abrupt of a shift. I wonder
Well,
why that is.
Well, think about when a cloud blocks the sun. You can get a very rapid shift in temperature there.
Sure, but you would think it would be more gradual simply because you have all of this material in the stratosphere would seemingly slowly dim the
No, I think
skies.
that they're referring to is that the year before it was summer, and then the next year it's winter and summer. It wasn't like an overnight switch, but it was. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, but what the sentence, temperatures dipped from above normal summer temperatures to near freezing within mere hours?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, that's interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, Lincoln's family lived at Knob Creek Farm during this time, so they would have experienced this climatic event. The lack of sun, freezing temperatures, and frost would have damaged, if not decimated, Lincoln's crops. And we do know that Thomas Jefferson lost his wheat crop, which he relied on for his income in 1816, and in fact had to take out a loan. Yeah. So pretty fantastic.
And then if you're a little person, if you're not a Thomas Jefferson and you're a little person and you're probably unable to take a loan at all, you're really screwed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you migrate. So there was so much material that this actually affected the climate on Earth for 3 years, and this is what led to millions of deaths. Yeah, millions died of cholera because of weather shifts in the Bay of Bengal. It caused an extremely wet monsoon, which lasted. And so if you're in really wet environments and crops are failing and people are weak and malnourished, you start to get cholera. And in this setting, a new species of cholera emerged that hadn't existed because of this prolonged period of different climate.
Yeah. And apparently the cholera eventually also spread to London and New York. It's basically spread around the world.
Yeah. Here it is.
Which may have something to do with the fact that it was a mutated cholera, but obviously like sanitation has a huge effect on whether or not cholera is contagious or around, but
and when would we expect it to mutate? During the Dalton minimum, which we are in the bottom of. So this is the highest cosmic ray activity where we could get that mutation to occur and take off.
Right. And this is not unsimilar to, we've talked in previous episodes about the Black Plague and how just a shift in temperatures would have allowed that bacteria to really take hold.
Yes, indeed. And so it's like the volcano sets up the recipe for all these things to occur.
Yeah.
In China, there was massive famine, and then floods destroyed all the remaining crops. So it's like famine on famine. The monsoon season was disrupted, resulting in overwhelming floods in the Yangtze Valley. Fort Shuangchen, which is now Heilongjiang, reported fields disrupted by frosts and conscripts deserting as a result. So I guess if you're working in the fields and that's what feeds you and then it all dies, you leave.
Yeah. Well, and apparently too, this also set off basically like the opium trade. Because a lot of people in China were like, you know what, we're not growing rice anymore. This isn't working out. We're going to go for crops where we can actually make money. And so suddenly you have tons of poppies being grown instead.
So the opioid epidemic started during the year without a summer.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. In Asia, there was also summer snowfall in various locations in Jingjai and Anhui, which is about 30 degrees north, in Taiwan, which is a tropical climate. Snow was reported also in Hsinchu and Miaoli, and frost reported in Changhua. Yeah, none of these cities are really ringing a bell.
Well, we're not exactly Asia experts or anything, so.
Yeah, in 1816 in Asia, due to the abnormal climate caused by the volcanic eruption, there was large-scale famine in Yuan. And this famine caused the Qing dynasty to turn from prosperity to decline. So, in the infamous words of David Dubon, grand solar minimums end Chinese empires.
Mm-hmm.
And in India, the delayed summer monsoon caused late torrential rains, aggravating the spread of the new form of cholera from the region in the Ganges and Bengal to as far as Moscow. And it is estimated that millions over the next 3 years died from this epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible.
It really does also just go to show how important sanitation structures are for things like cholera. Like what a huge difference that makes. So, right, like the cholera epidemic in Haiti from the earthquake in what year was that? 2019. What I don't remember what year. That cholera epidemic is still ongoing in Haiti.
Yeah, that's because they don't have really good sources of water.
Right, exactly. That's exactly my point. So once you lose that infrastructure, every civilization is at major risk.
And count your blessings, because this is going to happen again.
Yeah.
It's not a question of if, it's when.
Yes.
Hopefully it doesn't happen in our lifetime, but everything is lining up to suggest that it very well may.
Yeah.
Now, things weren't any better in Europe. We did show you that map. It's freezing cold there. The crops are failing. Food riots are occurring. And this is the first of the potato famines for Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
The main potato famine wasn't until 1845, but in the year without a summer, there was the first of the potato famines.
Mm-hmm. And we can definitely see how this can happen, right? We just had potatoes freeze for the first time ever in June.
Right, but what happened here is it rained for 8 weeks and the potatoes rot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. So that's what happened to all the crops here in that 8 weeks of rain in Europe.
Yeah.
For 8 weeks. That's not good for crops.
Yeah, I mean, well, it just goes to show that it doesn't necessarily take that much to bring down a civilization. I mean, I'm certainly not underestimating this event by any stretch, but all of the small factors, a shift of 3 or 4 degrees temperature, which is not small, it's rather large, but all of that adds up. All of these different small factors add up and they pile up on top of each other, and then the whole world is disrupted. It doesn't take that much.
Yeah, let me read you this account of what's going on over here in Europe. Food prices rose sharply throughout Europe in the year without a summer, with the cause of the problems unknown. So the people were clueless. Hungry people began demonstrating in front of grain markets and bakeries. Later, riots, arson, and looting took place in many of these European cities. And on some occasions, rioters were carrying flags that read bread or blood. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, imagine right now with all of the inflation that we have and the way food prices have been rising and not having any understanding of what's causing that. Yeah, of course you're going to be really angry and start rioting.
Yeah, it's globalism and Joe Biden.
Yeah, yes. Well, we know that, but in a world where we didn't know that, I mean, well, we probably should be uprising right now anyway, but anyway, that's another conversation.
Yeah, in the year without a summer, the uprising lasted for another year, all the way to 1817. It was the highest level of violence in Europe since the French Revolution. And the Napoleonic Wars also ended in 1816, when Napoleon lost at Waterloo because his advantage, which were his gigantic cannons, they could not be moved forward in the muck, in the mud. It had rained for 8 weeks. So they were literally stymied, and the Napoleonic Wars ended because of a volcanic eruption 7,000 miles away.
Amazing.
Yeah, so we've got famine in Ireland, and it rains for 8 weeks, and people are starving, and then it's not a cholera outbreak. In Ireland, we've got a typhus epidemic that lasted for over 3 years and killed an estimated 100,000 or more. So good times.
Yeah.
Low temperatures and heavy rains resulted in failed harvests in Great Britain. And families in Wales traveled long distances begging for food. Famine was prevalent in North and Southwest Ireland following the failure of wheat, oat, and potato harvests. And in Germany, the crisis was severe. That's incredible.
Mhm.
And the typhus epidemic didn't just occur in Ireland, it occurred throughout Europe, including Italy, Switzerland, and Scotland. Precipitated by malnourishment and famine caused by the year without a summer. And here they say 65,000 died. I just said 100,000. So you got to check your sources.
Mm-hmm. Well, and all of
So-
these numbers are going to be estimates anyway.
Yes. But there is better temperature records in Europe because it's been around longer than US. And the long-running Central England temperature record reported the 11th coldest year since 1659. And the third coldest summer and the coldest July on record.
Interesting that it was only the third coldest summer.
Yeah, so Earth is it's been very cold, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Huge storms and abnormal rainfall with flooding of Europe's major rivers, including the Rhine. And then an August frost. Jesus. Hungary experienced brown snow.
Mm.
And Italy's northern and north central region experienced something similar with red snow falling throughout the year.
Oh, I heard somewhere else that it was orange snow.
Red or orange, it's still weird.
Yep.
The effects were widespread and lasted beyond the winter in western Switzerland. The summers of 1816 and 17 were so cold that an ice dam formed below a tongue of the Gietro Glacier high in the Val de Bagnes. And despite engineer Ignaz Ventz's efforts to drain the lake, the ice dam collapsed catastrophically in June of 1818, killing 40 people below.
Mm.
So it's like a mini Maunder minimum. During the Maunder minimum, it lasted for a very long time, decades. These glaciers grew down the valleys and consumed some farmhouses.
Mhm.
But in this very short 1 year, it was like a mini ice age, and this huge glacial dam built, and they knew it was going to eventually melt when it got warm again. And sure enough, the next year, it actually took 2 years. Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it didn't warm up for 2 years.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Or it took that long for that ice dam to become weakened by warming temperatures, at least.
And so we have some accounts from North America. I talked about the dry fog.
Hmm.
Neither wind nor rainfall dispersed the fog. And it's been characterized as a stratospheric sulfate aerosol veil.
That's interesting. Because I was thinking that it would have been sort of like a haze, but a haze would get washed out of the sky with rain. This apparently not.
Yeah, like smoke when it's smoky here and then it rains, it's
Exactly.
bluebird.
Yeah.
But this doesn't go away with rain or wind.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
because
it's kind of
because
like
its
smog.
origination,
Go
its
ahead.
origin point is the stratosphere. That's why.
Yeah, bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah. What were you
The
saying?
weather was not in itself a hardship for those accustomed to long winters. Hardships came from the weather's effect on crops in the summer, and thus the supply of food and firewood. The consequences were felt mostly strong at high elevations where farming was already difficult even in good years. In May of 1816, frost killed off most of the crops in the higher elevations of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont, as well as upstate New York. And on June 6th, snow fell in Albany. Oh, we said that, didn't we?
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, and then New England experienced other major consequences because they were growing orchards. So you can imagine there's no fruit. We experienced that pretty
Yeah, we
regularly.
know all about that. It's very hard to grow fruit here, tree fruit anyway.
And the corn is reported to have ripened so poorly that less than a quarter of it was even usable for food.
Mm.
The moldy and unripe harvest was not even fit for animal feed.
That's bad.
Yeah. So
When you get to
everything's
that
starving.
point.
And then with all this failure, prices, this is like the largest spike in oat prices in recorded history, over 700% in just a few months.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like, and then you can't, even if you have a farm, you can't feed your animals because they're feeding their animals oats.
Yeah. Well, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be eating your animals instead, and then you're going to be running out of animals to eat.
And a lot of people were using oats for their horses. So it became very
Right.
expensive to own a horse.
Yeah.
You can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
At the Church family of Shakers near Lebanon, New York, Nicholas Bennett wrote in May of 1816, all was froze.
Mm.
On the hills were barren like winter. Temperatures went below freezing every day in May, and the ground froze solid on June 9th.
Sounds
The
almost like
Shaker-
living here.
Yeah, ours is June 23rd though, right?
Yeah.
The Shakers had to replant all crops destroyed by the cold. And then on July 7th, it was so cold that everything had stopped growing once again.
Mm.
Wah, wah.
I'm just thinking about, living through this and how your heart would just be sinking again and again. You would keep hoping that you would replant and it would get warmer and it would be okay. And then boom, you're screwed again.
They did replant. And then on August 23rd, another frost.
Yeah. Yeah. This is like us in late June, crossing our fingers that last frost doesn't happen. And then it always does.
Yeah. Severe frost occurred every month. June 7th and 8th, snow fell, and it was so cold that crops were cut down, even freezing the roots. In early autumn, when corn was in the milk, it was so thoroughly frozen that it never ripened, and it was scarcely worth harvesting.
What does that mean when corn was in the milk? What does that mean?
This is dent corn, the milk phase.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's getting fertilized and the kernels are growing, but then it froze.
Right. Okay.
Breadstuffs were scarce and prices were high. The poorer class of people were often in straits or wants of food. Wow.
Mm.
It must be remembered that the granaries of the Great West had not then been opened to us by railroad, and people were obliged to rely on local resources or upon others in their immediate locality. So if you've got nothing locally,
then you start eating your neighbors.
No, that's why everyone left.
Yeah.
They went to Illinois and Indiana.
Yeah.
In July and August, lake and river ice was observed as far south as, that's crazy, the Poconos.
Mm-hmm.
And frost, we said, was reported as far south as Virginia on August 20th and the 21st. Rapid, dramatic temperature swings were very common this year, with temperatures sometimes reverting from normal or above normal as high as 95 Fahrenheit to 35 degrees C within hours, according to Thomas Jefferson. That's like our temperature swings.
Yeah, yeah. That probably explains the previous reference that I was questioning about, big temperature swings within hours. The answer is that climactically, really what's happening is you're having a lot of fluctuations, a lot of up and downs in temperature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's like here, we get on a regular basis, we have a 40-degree Fahrenheit swing between night and day, but sometimes it's as much as 60 degrees.
Yeah, exactly. And
which is why it's easy for us to get a frost in late June, right? Because even this time of year, it's in the 40s at night.
Yeah, we seldom get above 50 or so, 55.
Mm-hmm.
It's always cold here.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was just a terrible time on Earth. It literally changed Earth's history. It started the migration of the settlers in the U.S. There were mass migrations in Europe. It ended the Napoleonic Wars.
Mm-hmm.
It created a new epidemic of cholera, and it shrunk the human population quite considerably.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this isn't unique. These events happen all the time. An even worse event happened in 536, and we have some great videos on that.
Mm-hmm.
The worst year ever to be alive.
Yeah.
The sun lost its wanton light.
I wonder what the percentage of lives lost out of the global population was in around thereabouts, or 1816. I don't know what the world population was, but it certainly couldn't have been more than like 1 billion people, and you've got at least 1 million people that perished, but maybe more than that. Do you have figures on that? I kept hearing like 1 million people, but it seems like it might be more than that.
Well, millions died from cholera in the 3 years following as it
Yeah.
spread.
Yeah.
And then the typhus epidemic only killed about 100,000, and then the eruption itself about 100,000. So it's probably just a small percentage of the population, 1 or 2% at maximum.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm thinking the population is more like 500 million at this time, but we can check.
Yeah, no, that could very well be the case. It may not be
Yeah.
a billion. That could be a huge over. I mean, let's say in the 1940s, I think the population was about 3 billion, and this is exponential growth typically. So
Yeah.
so probably half a billion is about right.
Yeah. And why would you stop counting the cholera deaths after 3 years? It's still around. So this literally continued to kill millions of people for the years following.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and there it is. Another show. We love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. This will be up on Magnetic Reversal News tonight on YouTube. So go check it out.
8 o'clock Mountain Time.
All right.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.